Hello, welcome to another video from Accounting How. In this video, we are looking at bank reconciliation. It's the second video on the channel about bank reconciliation. As always, if you haven't done so, please do subscribe to the channel, like, share the videos, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Accounting How. Okay, so here's the question. If you've done the first video on the channel on bank reconciliation, you might wish just to have a go at this one yourself. But just bear in mind that there is a query in it, a check that the owner of the business is querying. So if you haven't dealt with queries before, you might want to stick with me to have a look together. Here we go then. So we've got Arif's cash book and bank statement for May are shown below. And you'll remember from the first video, the cash book in these sorts of questions typically only shows the bank columns because we're only really concerned with the bank. We don't need the cash column or indeed the discount columns. There's his bank statement. And underneath, we're being told then Arif did not recognise cheque number 3092 and queried it with his bank. The bank manager said it had been debited by mistake and apologised. So what we've got here is when he's got his bank statement, he's looked through it, and you can see on his bank statement on May the 26th, there is cheque number 3092 and £570 has been debited, so in other words, taken out from his bank account. And Arif's thinking, well, I don't recognise that cheque, I don't remember writing that. And indeed, if you look at his cash book, on the credit side of his cash book, you can see the recent cheques he's been writing, cheque number 1078, 1079, 1080. So this cheque number 3092 is completely out of sequence with the cheques that Arif's been writing. And so basically he doesn't recognise it. So he's queried it with his bank, and that's just to ask the bank to investigate to see what it is. And it could be that Arif's gone wrong, made a mistake somewhere, in which case Arif would need to correct it. But in this case, the bank manager has said it was debited by mistake and apologised. So this was a mistake on the bank's point of view, from the bank's point of view, and that 570 shouldn't have been debited from his account and on the bank statement. So that's something we'll need to deal with as we go along. And then required, we're being asked then to prepare an updated cash book at the 31st of May and the bank reconciliation statement at the 31st of May. First thing I'm starting to do then, again, if you've watched the first video, you will remember I'm effectively trying to pair off things in the cash book and the bank reconciliation. So things that both Arif knows about because he's got them in his cash book and things that appear on the bank statement. And the first thing I've paired, you can see, is this £2,500. Arif has debited it. The bank will see that as a credit, as we've explained before. And the dates and the narratives similar, but again, remember that the bank, often the dates will just be a couple of days later. The narratives might not be exactly the same. So Arif said it was cash and a contra entry, so he's basically paid in some cash into the bank, whereas the bank statement is just recording it as a counter credit. In other words, Arif or somebody from the business went to the bank, literally to the counter, and paid in this cash. But we can see they're the same transaction, so I've paired them off. Another one I've got, we've got on the credit of his cash book, you can see I've paired then cheque number 1078 that he paid for the rent, and I've paired that off in his bank statement. You can see it there. The bank has only recorded it as cheque 1078. They're not interested in who it went to, but from his point of view, he's obviously put rent in his cash book because that's what he'll have double entered it to the rent account. But the amount's the same. In the bank statement, it's 3 days later. That's because the cheque probably took those days just to clear. And I can't see anything else that I can pair off. So I then go to part A, prepare an updated cash book. And you can see I've got mine drawn out, just the bank columns are ready. And what I'm doing, the things that I've highlighted in green, these are the things that I'm dealing with. So I'm going to start where Arif left off. So in his cash book, he's got that balance carried down of 4315. And then I'm going to deal with the things that are in the bank statement, but not yet in the cash book. So all of the things I've highlighted green. So he says in his cash book, at the end of the May, he's got a balance carried down of 4315. If it's carried down on the credit, it will be brought down then on the debit. And you can see there it is then. Again, I can't quite fit everything on. I want to try and keep it on one screen. So I've just put M for May. So May the 31st, he'll have a debit balance brought down of 4315. And then I start working through then the things that are on the bank statement but not yet in the cash book, because that's the first thing I'm doing. I'm updating the cash book. So I'm only concerned with things that are on the bank statement but not yet in the cash book. And the first thing, May the 14th, there was a direct debit paid to Facilities Limited. It's on the debit in the bank, which means it is a credit in his cash book. And there it is. So I've recorded it as Facilities Limited because that's the main thing he's going to be interested in. But I've put DD in brackets just to identify it was a direct debit. And then next thing, some bank interest. And you always be careful with bank interest because it might be that the owner has earned some bank interest, or it might be that the bank has charged them some bank interest. And really, you just have to pay attention to the debits and the credits. So on the bank statement, I can see on May the 24th, there was bank interest, and his bank account was credited with £45. And if I look at the rolling balance in his bank statement, I can see it's gone from 2,650 up to 2,695. So he has earned this interest. Another way to remember is that, as we've said a few times, if it's credited on the bank statement, it will be debited in the cash book. So that 45 then needs to appear as a debit. He has earned £45, and there it is. I've put it onto the debit of his cash book. The next item, I haven't shaded this check, the one we spoke about a minute ago. And remember, that's the one that he queried. And because he's queried it and the bank has said, yep, okay, sorry about that, it's not, it was our mistake, he's not going to put it in his cash book. He doesn't want to go putting something in his cash book that doesn't apply to him. Even if it hadn't yet been resolved by the bank, if he just queried it and was still waiting for a response, he still wouldn't put it into his cash book. So when you're dealing with anything that's being queried, don't put it in the cash book, because once it goes in that cash book, it's there forever. And if it turns out not to be anything to do with his business, we've now got to do more entries to undo that. So while something's being queried, or even if it has been sorted, don't put it in. And we'll deal with it later. Obviously, if the bank came back and said, you know, it was his, well then yeah, we do put it in. But for any point where it's being queried and hasn't yet been resolved, or indeed, like in this case, the bank's come back and said, no, it's not yours, sorry about that, don't put it in. And then the final thing, we've got May the 31st, a debit card. So he's made a debit card payment to Pods PLC. And so debit in the bank statement is a credit in the cash book. And there it is. I put debit card in brackets. It's not necessary, but you know, it's just a little reference. So I've updated the cash book. I've put in everything that's on the bank statement, apart from the query, that isn't yet in the cash book. And now it's just a case of balancing off the cash book. And there we go. We can see that bringing down the balance on June the 1st, he now has £2,370 in the bank. Part B then is to do his bank reconciliation statement. And there I've got it laid out then. So who, it's for Arif, what is it, his bank reconciliation statement, when for the 31st of May. And you can see I've now highlighted the things I need to deal with here. So this time we're working the other way around. We're starting with the figure in the bank statement, how much money the bank thinks we've got. And then now I'm going to deal with the things that are in the cash book, but not yet in the bank statement. However, unlike the first question in the first video, because of this query, I'm also going to need to deal with the query. So I'm starting then with the balance as per the bank statement. And according to the bank statement at the end of May, he's got 1,985. And so there's my starting figure. It's a credit. So from the bank's point of view, it's a liability. So from Arif's point of view, it's an asset. So it's not an overdraft. According to the bank, he's actually got money in his bank this time. Unlike the first video, he's got 1,985 in the bank. And then next thing I'm going to do, I'm looking at his cash book and I can see over on the debit, we've got Inez PLC and Julie & Co. And neither of those amounts have appeared on the bank statement. So he's received money from both of these companies and it's not yet showing up. So these are his uncleared bankings. And so I'm going to add those on because once they've cleared, that's going to increase the amount in his bank account. I'm going to list them. So we've got Aniz PLC 1200, Julie & Co. So together that's £1,854, which will take his balance in the bank up to 3839. Next thing I'm going to deal with here, you can deal with it last, but I'm going to do it now, is this query. So what we've got to think with the query is think what has actually happened. So if I look at his bank statement, it's been debited with £570. So the bank has taken £570 out of his bank account. But the bank has now said, nope, sorry, apologies, was a mistake. So effectively, when the bank corrects it, his account is going to go back up by £570. So that's what I'm going to record now, and you can see I've done it there. I've added the check query. And as I said a few minutes ago, even if the bank hadn't yet come back, if he was still querying it, I would still undo whatever was done. So in this case, the bank took it out, so I'm adding it back on. If it doesn't normally come up in these sorts of questions, but if the bank had added it into the bank, well, then I would need to subtract the query. But generally in these sorts of questions, it tends to be that something has been debited, subtracted from the bank, and it's a case of adding it back on if it's being queried. And then finally then, I look at the credit of his cash book, and we can see he's got two checks that he's written, check number 1079 and 1080 to Dreamy Limited and Jack & Co. And they're not yet showing up on the bank statement either. There's obviously been a bit of a delay in getting these processed. So, but he knows when those checks do get processed, it's going to reduce his bank balance. So these are what we call the unpresented checks, checks that Arif has written that haven't yet, for whatever reason, been presented to the bank for payment. So Dreamy and Jack & Co. So when they do get presented, that's going to reduce his balance by 2039. And then that gives me then a final figure, which I'm calling the balance as per updated cash book, 2370. And you can see it reconciles with, reconcile just means agree effectively, so it agrees with, it reconciles with the balance in part A, the updated cash book, the 2370. So we know that the process has worked. Just another quick reminder, as I said in the first video, remember it is possible to do this bank reconciliation statement upside down and start with the balance as per updated cash book and finish with the balance as per bank statement. That's absolutely fine. But if you're doing it that way round, everything I've added you'd need to less, and the less unpresented checks you would need to add. And again, my advice is pick a way and stick with a way. If you've been taught the other way, I'd stick with that way. If you are looking at another resource, you may want to use that way. But just pick a way, because if you keep switching, you're more likely to make errors. Okay, hope that's been another helpful video. Don't forget, please, to subscribe to the channel, like, share the videos, and remember you can follow us on Twitter at AccountingHow.